Tonight, the Southport killer is jailed for life. Axel Rudakubana, who was 17 when he stabbed 3 girls to death at a dance class in the town, is given a minimum term of 52 years. Families of the victims tell how their world has been shattered and turned upside down, with cries of "coward" heard after Rudakubana was removed from the room.
It was of such extreme violence, of the utmost and exceptionally high seriousness, that it is difficult to comprehend why it was done.
The local MP for Southport tells me he wants a review into the sentence after making a formal complaint about it being unduly lenient. The Prime Minister pledges to deliver the change that the victims deserve, but Kemi Badenoch says the government's response has fallen short. Also tonight, Starmer versus the nimbys. The Prime Minister throws down the gauntlet to campaigners trying to block major projects. Is Labour in danger of losing its environmental credentials? I'll speak to the co-leader of the Greens, Adrian Ramsey. And the calm after the storm. Ireland finally appoints the new Prime Minister after chaotic scenes last night. But how does it compare with parliamentary meltdowns from around the world? All that and more with Caroline Flint and Gato Hari, who'll be with us for the next hour. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Tonight's show is going to be a tough watch. If you want to look away from the horror of what happened, I get that, because it truly is impossible to bear. But today was important, really important, not just because the killer, whose name I don't even really want to say, was locked up, but because we heard the truth of what happened on that day in Southport, in the room where Taylor Swift was playing and children were dancing. You know, we heard from little girls who survived, from mums and dads whose lives will never really be lives again. So if you're watching now, thank you for listening and for facing up to the reality of what happened, which is more than the killer did. He said he was feeling ill, so he couldn't be in court. So he was thrown out for being disruptive. As he left, one of the parents shouted, "Coward." Now, there are questions about compelling criminals to be at their sentencing and listen, about whether you should be able to get a whole life sentence if you're a juvenile, and about the failures of the state that led to this point. But today is really about those little girls. So our first report today is from our chief North of England correspondent, Greg Milam, and needless to say, there is a warning that this contains some very distressing content.
This is Axel Rudakubana on July the 29th, on his way to carry out a knife attack on a class full of young girls. At the bus stop, he paces up and down while phoning for a taxi. On that 5-mile journey, he's silent until the very end. When he checks, he's at the right address. After he refused to pay, the taxi dash cam records him approaching the door of the dance studio, looking to find his way in. We know what happened next. Inside, 26 girls were enjoying a Taylor Swift dance event at the start of the summer holidays, an event that had sold out. The girls were at a table making friendship bracelets, when without a word Rudakubana entered and grabbed the child nearest to him. He then moved on to a second and a third, lunging at them. Leanne Lucas, who was running the class that day, said she only realised what was happening when she felt a knife go into her back. Some people left the courtroom because the details of what happened here that day were so graphic. The court was played CCTV footage in which the screams of children can be heard. Leanne Lucas is seen trying to usher them to safety. One child tries to leave the building, but is pulled back in by Rudakubana. She was one of the injured. Deanna Here, KC, said the injuries sustained by 2 of the children who died could only be described as sadistic in nature. BB King, Elsie Stancombe and Alice Aguiar died in the attack. 8 other girls were injured. The court heard Rudakubana's only intention that day was to kill. After he was arrested, he told police, "It's a good thing those children are dead. I'm so glad. I'm so happy." Among the weapons at his home, police found a second knife, identical to the one used in the attack. They also found evidence of his obsession with violence. In the dock, Rudakubana began shouting that he was ill and needed to see a paramedic, with the families of the victims listening in court. When he refused to stop, the judge ordered him to be removed. We then heard from some of those whose lives have been changed by the events of that day, including one of the girls who was injured. The beginning of my nightmare, she said, started when I saw you. I thought you were playing a joke. I saw you in your green hoodie and face mask. The thing I remember most about you is your eyes. You looked possessed. You didn't look human. Leanne Lucas also addressed the court.
I cannot give myself compassion or accept praise, as how can I live knowing I survived when children died? The trauma of being both a victim and a witness has been horrendous. The impact this has had on me can be summed up by one word: trauma. He targeted us because we were women and girls, vulnerable and easy prey.
There was a statement from the parents of Alice.
Alice was always a very kind girl who valued equality and fairness at the core. A world of possibilities awaited her, a best friend anyone could ask for. We were so lucky and privileged to have her. Every day felt like a gift. In a matter of minutes, our worlds were shattered and turned upside down by the devastating attack on our Alice. A pin drop that changed our lives forever. We kept our hopes up every second during Alice's 14-hour fight, but once she'd lost a fight, we lost our lives. Everything stopped still, and we froze in time and space. Our life went with her. He took us too.
And from Elsie's mum.
You deliberately chose that place, fully aware that there would be no parents present, fully aware that girls were vulnerable and unable to protect themselves. We were robbed of the opportunity to protect our girls. What you did was not only cruel and pure evil, it was the act of a coward.
Rudakubana wasn't in court to hear any of that, or the judge sentence him.
The prosecution have made it clear that these proceedings were not acts of terrorism within the meaning of the terrorism legislation, because there is no evidence that Rudakubana's purpose was to advance political, religious, racial or ideological cause. I must accept that conclusion. However, in my judgment, his culpability for this extreme level of violence is equivalent in its seriousness to terrorist murders, whatever his purpose. Whether his motivation was for terrorism or not misses the point. What he did on the 29th of July last year has caused such shock and revulsion to the whole nation that it must be viewed as being at the very extreme level of crime. His culpability and the harm he caused and intended were at the highest. I'm now going to sentence Axel Rudakubana, having explained my reasons. On counts 1 to 3 murder, I sentence him to custody for life with a minimum term which he must serve in custody of 52 years, less the time he's served already.
Police say they've never established why Rudakubana chose that venue, those girls, as his target.
He's just the most despicable young person who's committed the most vile and violent acts that are going to have an impact on the victims and their families for the rest of their lives. Words almost fail to describe him in terms of just what a despicable person he is.
The judge said it is highly unlikely Rudakubana will ever be released, but so many questions remain, and all of it has come too late for the so many lives altered and the young lives lost. Greg Milam, Sky News, Southport.
It's just unbearable details emerging today, and as you'd expect, politicians have been trying to react to the enormity of what we've seen. We can talk now to our political correspondent, Liz Bates, who joins us now. Liz, there has been a response, hasn't there?
Yes, lots of response to this, as you might imagine. First of all, we've had a statement from the Prime Minister. What he says is the thoughts of the entire nation are with the families and everyone affected by the unimaginable horrors that unfolded in Southport. No words will ever be able to capture the depth of their pain. I want to say directly to the survivors, families and community of Southport, you are not alone. We stand with you in your grief. What happened in Southport was an atrocity, and as the judge has stated, this vile offender will likely never be released. After one of the most harrowing moments in our country's history, we owe it to these innocent young girls and all those affected to deliver the change that they deserve. And this, of course, is on the back of a week where the Prime Minister responded much more broadly to this horrendous crime with a public inquiry, questions over the anti-terror body Prevent and other authorities that were aware of this individual but didn't take the steps necessary to prevent this, a new commissioner for Prevent as part of that, and a bit of a wider question that the Prime Minister raised over categorising this crime as terrorism and whether the law needs to change so that in future crime like this could be categorised. And he addressed another political issue that I think will continue after today to challenge the Prime Minister, which with the allegations at the time that he had somehow covered up something in the wake of this crime because he didn't intervene with specific details on this individual. We have also had a response today from Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the Conservative Party. Quite an interesting statement from her. She echoes a lot of what the Prime Minister says. She also says there's a strong case for amending the law to give clear judicial discretion to award a whole life sentence to under 18 because, of course, he was 17 when he committed this crime, so he can't be given a whole life sentence. She says the Conservatives will explore the possibility of that. She also says, one of my greatest frustrations is the deflection that often follows domestic terror incidents. It's absurd that we are debating online knife sales more than we are integration and how we safeguard our society from extreme ideologies and violence. She goes on to say that the Conservatives will challenge the Prime Minister on the task he has to ensure that those we welcome into Britain share our values, contribute positively to our society, and how we make sure this continues through multiple generations. Now, that seems like a reference to Axel Rudakubana's Rwandan heritage, potentially. So you can see that there are many, many issues that this case raises. Today is about the sentencing, today is about the families, but the political implications, I think, of this will continue over the next few weeks and potentially many months and years.
Yeah, you can definitely see that, can't you? Liz, thank you very much indeed. Liz Bates there, talking us through the political reaction. And Sarah J. Mean, who's been, of course, covering this today from Southport, will also be having a special edition of the UK Tonight live from Southport this evening. That's at 8 p.m. tonight, so just after this programme. Let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Labour Minister Caroline Flint and Goto Hari, the former Director of Communications at Downing Street. First, I just want to say thank you for being here on such a difficult day. It's such a difficult story to talk about, obviously, but the natural thing is to talk about what lessons we can learn, what can we do, how can we make sure this never happens again. Maybe it is, impossible to make everything better, but there must be something.
Yeah, and in the end, we all feel that some good has got to come out of so much evil. And so you've got to channel the anxiety, the disgust, the fury, the sadness, the tragedy. You've got to channel that into something constructive in the end. It's very hard to do. And I frankly have to say that sometimes with something like this, you kind of wish that society could have, events could have taken their own course and something bad would have happened to him by now. But we can't do that in cold blood. He's going to prison. He's going to prison for a long, long time. But the question for me is not how did he do it, but why did he do it? And so let's not get distracted by the weapon, because you can always find a different weapon. Let's just question why a young man, and it's harrowing for me, who grew up in my hometown of Cardiff, but capable and wanting to do something so ghastly. What is it that means I've never had that urge in 58 years, and someone like that seems to think it's nothing and does it. So we really have got to explore the basis on which people are allowed to participate in society, certainly are allowed to come into this country. And when we spot some telltale signs, which frankly there were a lot on this occasion, what is it that we can put in place that would stop that, would identify them and then do something about it?
This is it, isn't it? Because there has been a focus on the weapon and the fact he got a knife off Amazon when he was underage, and But it does seem to me that, you know, the real thing is the number of times the state had contact with this individual, whether it is Prevent, the school, whatever. I mean, Caroline, in your background at the Home Office, it must be setting off alarm bells.
Of course. And, I mean, you know, a knife was used to commit these barbarous attacks on these children and murdering 3 of them. And let's not forget, other children were attacked, other adults were attacked, and they're living with the consequences of all this as well, and their families. And my heart goes out to them and the mums and dads of the 3 little girls who lost their lives. But actually, you know, if someone like this will find any weapon, they will find something. He was producing ricin, homemade ricin at home in his bedroom. The fact that he could even, well, first of all, access the materials, but clearly was using the internet to find out about that. So someone like this, you know, of course we've got to do something about access to knives and guns. But if they want to kill, they will kill. So I think it goes back to your point. We need to understand what was going on here. I don't think you can ever 100%, I'm sad to say this, I don't think you can ever 100% stop something awful happening. But we need to understand better what was going on with this child that became a teenager and going through puberty to end up with situations where at school it appears that his violence increased, his propensity to violence increased, he was expelled from school. As you say, Sophie, there are a number of red flags. He was part of the Prevent programme. A number of interventions presumably were made. Where was the follow-up to that? I think we were talking earlier, he went to a school, he wasn't there, nobody was checking up why he wasn't there. And that's why it's right that Yvette Cooper, as the Home Secretary, said there has to be a public inquiry. We've had Prevent for a long time now. And there have been questions, every now and again, sporadically it comes up, is what's Prevent doing? Is it doing the job it was meant to do? It started around extremism and terrorism, but this is an individual who, from what we understand, had no ideological issue. He wasn't aligned with a political terrorist group, but he was embarking on a terror campaign to kill. And is Prevent good enough to deal with that sort of individual, a sort of lone wolf that's working on their own, accessing the internet, their violence increasing every day, their anger? Are they good enough to do that? And I think that's a real question that the government has to look at, and those agencies already involved in Prevent and other programmes to really question, is that good enough for these sort of individuals? Do we need something different to take action earlier and much clearer, stronger action? To prevent them as much as possible, being able to take this sort of action and this violence into our community.
One thought from me, you start with low-level stuff. Not everybody's going to progress to the kind of horrors of this. But I do think that there's something about zero tolerance of low-level criminality. And I can't help thinking, in a reasonably nice part of London where I live, 3 guys raced past on electric bikes today, masks, hoodies, clearly drug dealing. Everybody locally knows who they are, what they're up to, and yet there is never an attempt to shut them down. And so they feel that they can act with impunity. And it starts with drug dealing, then it's knife carrying, and then it's hurting someone. And
you see it a lot with sexual offences as well. Like if you look at the Sarah Everard murder, it's the kind of flashing first or whatever that people kind of don't really take that seriously, but then it kind of progresses.
It's I think that's sometimes I talk about things like the broken window. You know, people walk every day past a broken window. And sooner or later, you know, someone comes along and says, well, why don't we break another window? Why should we bother? I mean, there was a poll I saw the other week, last 2 weeks, which was quite worrying, actually, about public attitudes to, for example, shoplifting or committing an offence. It seems that sort of, you know, the pendulum swung where we have more people think that low-level criminality, not abiding by the rules is OK, and it's not OK.
It's very interesting.
Well, Donald Trump is talking about, you know, shooting shoplifters at sight. And it sounds extreme, it sounds a little bit crazy, but he's on to something, because we, as much as we may be uncomfortable with that idea, we should be equally uncomfortable with the idea that a bunch of guys can walk into the Apple store in the middle of Covent Garden, a mile from here, and walk out with thousands of pounds worth of high-tech stuff with impunity. You know, we have got to sort of get back to restoring the basics, which is the rule of law and the respect for the law, enforcing laws that we believe should be enforced. If you want to legalise cannabis, great. But while cannabis is not legalised, don't just let people sort of smoke with impunity in public parks, because they then end up thinking laws mean nothing.
OK, thanks both very much indeed. Thank you. Well, the local Labour MP for Southport, Patrick Hurley, has submitted a formal request to the Attorney-General that today's sentence was unduly lenient. He was in Southport when I spoke to him just before coming on air. Thank you so much for being on the programme today. It's been utterly unbearable. What's your reaction to what we've heard?
Yeah, unbearable is the word. Harrowing and intensely distressing for the whole town, for the whole community, but most obviously for the families involved. Listening to the impact statements being read out in court this afternoon just got to the nub of just how horrific the atrocity was in the town back in July. How on earth the families have coped these last 6 months. My heart goes out to them because the bravery, the strength they've shown is just off the scale, and I really don't know how they've coped. The support that's been offered to them from the town has been immense, but nothing could ever be enough to allow them to come to terms with what they've gone through. I'm sure that support will continue, but yes, I think today's a day for remembering the girls and for putting our hearts out to the families involved here.
Yeah, you talked there about the impact statements that were read out, and as you say, they were absolutely extraordinary. The resilience that they've shown in the face of the horror, the worst thing that could possibly have happened. Somebody who didn't hear them because he wasn't in court was the killer, who was ejected from court twice after saying that he wasn't feeling well. Should he have been forced to stay and listen to the full sentencing and the full impact statements today?
It was an absolute disgrace, not just the not guilty plea and then changing the plea on the first day of the trial, but the attitude, the behaviour, the utter shameful lack of remorse that we've seen today. For me, this just exacerbates the pain and the suffering and the distress that the families have gone through. We saw the parents of one of the little girls who was murdered shouting out "coward" as he was pretending to be taken ill in court, and that just really does kind of point to precisely what he is. He's not just a violent, murderous thug. He's a coward, and I am hopeful that he never gets to see the light of day again. That he will indeed, as the judge has said, spend the rest of his life behind bars. I'm well aware that he was 9 days short of being 18 years old, and that prevents him being given a full life tariff. But if that prevents him from actually staying behind bars for the rest of his life, then I would actually want to see a change in the law to make sure that that never happens again.
It feels that there are two really important things to discuss here. The firstly about the forcing somebody to listen to their sentencing, and secondly about how young people are tried and sentenced when they commit crimes like this. So just on the first one, laws to force criminals to attend their sentencing are currently going through the report stage in the Commons. I mean, would you like to see individuals like this forced to be in court, to listen and to face up to what they've done?
100% I would. The so-called, the name given is obviously Olivia's Law, named after Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was similarly killed, and we saw in that case that the murderer was refusing to show up for the sentencing and the hearing. Fully support the changes in the law that need to be brought in, because as we've seen today, some of the people that are perpetrating horrific, unspeakable crimes are then rubbing salt in the wounds of the victims and their families by not attending the court. So yeah, that change in the law has my total and complete support.
And then just on the second point that you were making about how, because he was under 21 at the time, your understanding is that that's why he couldn't be given a full life term, even though he's been sentenced to 52 years minimum. Do you think we should look again then at the way young people are treated in the courts when they commit the worst kind of crime?
I don't want children to be treated as adults, but at the same time, this was an adult in all but name. He was 9 days short of his 18th birthday. He was planning this on a premeditated basis. It would not surprise me if part of that premeditation was that he decided to commit the atrocity, the multiple murders, in the week prior to his 18th birthday, purely to avoid a full life tariff. And I think in circumstances such as this, exceptional circumstances, then exceptional circumstances demand an exception to the law. And if the law cannot be resolved to have a full life tariff in this case, then yes, we do need to look again to see what can be done to make sure that similar crimes that may be taking place in the future do not result in similar lenient sentences here.
Now, when you were first elected as the MP for Southport earlier last year, you could have never imagined that something like this would have happened to the community that you represent. What's it been like?
One of my colleagues down in Parliament said to me that this was almost a baptism of fire as an MP, but my response was that something like this would be completely unprecedented. I was in the job for 3 weeks, but it wouldn't have mattered if I'd have been in the job for 30 years, because unprecedented is still unprecedented. And I think that just shows that, firstly, it's really good that, on the one hand, this doesn't happen day in, day out in a civilised country. But it also shows, I think, just the nature of which the Southport community have assisted here. I'm only the MP. The MPs come and MPs go. But the people here in Southport, it's really been on them to show how much solidarity, how much support, how much of that supportive nature when the community rose up as one to say, what happened on the 29th of July does not represent us. And the peaceful vigils and the way that the community as a whole responded, I think that's to be commended. And obviously this afternoon, this evening, we do need to keep in mind that today is not a day for jubilation or celebration. It's just another milestone on the process by which the town, the community and the families themselves can move on in their stages of grief.
Yeah, it's as you say, it has been a credit, the way so many people have responded. It's natural, of course, when something as awful as this happens, that there's a political response. But I just wondered, just finally, if you have a message for politicians today.
Well, I think the message to politicians is that, to reiterate maybe what the Prime Minister said Tuesday morning, calling for the public inquiry and setting that up, there's been multiple elements of state failure over the past 5 years, from the first intervention with the Prevent programme and Rudakubana going back to 2019. And so my message to my fellow politicians and to all aspects of the state is, let's get to grips with this and let's find out exactly what went wrong in the 5 years prior to July and make sure that never happens again.
OK, thank you very much indeed. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, the Prime Minister promises to take on the nimbys as he sets out plans to get nuclear plants, train lines and wind farms built quicker. Plus...
Thank you. We will suspend. Deputy, please resume your seat. Resume your seats.
As the Irish Parliament descends into chaos, we'll look back at times lawmakers have lost the plot.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious.
Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there. This is much more like a normal town. It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive.
This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world.
Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people. Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
Hello, welcome back. Well, the Prime Minister has promised to take on the nimbys with rule changes to stop them blocking new infrastructure projects. Under the plans, people who seek to challenge major projects through the courts will have fewer chances to do so. He says with the changes, nuclear plants, train lines and wind farms will be built quicker as the government pushes for economic growth. Well, our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, is here with me. Sam, you've been, I guess, pretty exercised about this story all day.
So it's not about the government's proposals. All this week we've seen Keir Starmer roll out a number of things to make it easier to build, potentially, some would say, at the expense of environmental obligations. We'll wait to see some of the detail on that. But something surprised me today, Sophie. It rather shocked me. I'm not easily shocked, as you know. Keir Starmer wrote an article in the Daily Mail in order to talk about his proposals. And, you know, here it is. It's the kind of thing that we see quite a lot. But in this article, over the first 6 paragraphs, he absolutely goes for, roasts and slates an individual former Green Norfolk councillor, a computer scientist, who, sure, has taken a few road schemes to the High Court and is challenging a carbon capture scheme up in Teesside, but zeroes in on this one individual. And he talks about their ideological blind spots and the fact that they're doing this with no chance of winning, and they're not doing it for themselves. They're doing it for themselves and not the country, and blames them for wasting taxpayers' money, and just really zero identifying this figure, the names in the paper. And I think I was just surprised that the Prime Minister, a person with big status, big clout, using a major newspaper, should single out a single individual and sort of basically paint a target on their back and going, look, world, he's the problem, when actually it's a massive kind of structural problem, a legal and political problem, and it's much more than about one man. So I talked to Andrew Boswell, the person that the Prime Minister attacked. Here's what he said.
I think it's a very dangerous thing of the Prime Minister to do, and he shouldn't have approached it this way.
Why do you think it's dangerous for Keir Starmer to do this?
Well, he has named me. I'm just an ordinary person, member of the public. I go about my life on that basis. I don't have a vast media team to protect me. I don't have other protections. I mean, actually, it's quite pathetic bullying of the Prime Minister. And actually, he underrates us if he thinks he's actually going to put me off by naming me in public. He completely underrates what the environmental movement is about. It's quite pathetic that he thinks he'll put us off.
That's the individual that Keir Starmer suggested was a NIMBY and a zealot, not backing down, but perhaps rather unbecoming of Keir Starmer?
I guess it comes back, doesn't it, to the kind of wider point here about how this is a government that needs to go for growth. You know, they're banked it all on growth, and if that doesn't happen, then they're in trouble, right?
That's right. So I think the government has actually got quite a lot of plaudits today and this week for rolling out a series of plans that hopefully, if they get it right, will mean that it's easier to build things and build houses and big infrastructure projects, and they're changing the way that the environmental rules might work, and they're changing the way that people might be able to use the court system. But they're trying to do it in a way that doesn't completely sweep away all of our natural environmental obligations. It's a tough ask, and it's going to be a months and months long negotiation with green groups and environmentalists to try and keep as broad a coalition as possible. And I think there's a bit of a danger in the kind of tough guy, chest-beating approach that Keir Starmer's adopted in his tone today, in the Mail, in the Times, sort of looking like he's won this particular fight when he's only just begun it. But, Sophie, There are two problems. These are sensible reforms for the long term. We're not going to see the benefits of these reforms in terms of taxpayer cash going into the exchequer for 10, 15 years. Rachel Reeves has a problem, as we keep discussing, as soon as March the 26th. It's then that they might find that she's borrowing too much, breaking her rules, and will be needed to cut. And as Andy Haldane, the top economist, told you last week, that's the last thing she should do. There's a rut that none of these things that you're hearing about actually solves.
OK, Sam, thank you very much indeed. Sam Coates there, a Deputy Political Editor. Coming up next on the Politics Hub, we'll get reaction to the Prime Minister's plans from the co-leader of the Green Party, Adrian Ramsey. Hello, welcome back. Well, before the break, we were hearing about the Prime Minister's crusade to take on the nimbys, in his words, who, in his view, are blocking big infrastructure projects. Well, let's explore that a bit more now. Joining us in the studio is Adrian Ramsey, the co-leader of the Green Party in England and Wales. Great to have you on the programme. I just want to kind of go big picture before we talk about what Keir Starmer's doing specifically, because are you worried that at the minute, across the world, it feels like the tide is turning away from the green agenda? If you look to the States, if you look to the political debate between Labour and the Conservatives here?
Yes, I am worried, and I'm particularly worried because we have to look at what's actually happening with the climate. The wildfires in California, the growing extreme floods in different parts of the world, the hurricanes, ironically, particularly affecting the USA, but also many other parts of the world. And of course, yes, President Trump coming in and immediately withdrawing the US from the Paris Climate Agreement is extremely worrying, and it could lead to despair from any of us who want to avoid the worst effects of climate breakdown. We mustn't let it do that. We have to keep on pushing, both for the global action that's needed on these issues, but also the action that we need to take at home to make the UK as resilient as we can be to the changes that are coming down the track.
So you're not despairing yet, or are you feeling a bit of despair?
Look, all of us have a human reaction to seeing the wildfires that are happening, to seeing the flooding, the hurricanes. It's awful, the human cost of this. We're going to have more of it. We need to avoid the very worst effects of it, and we can't afford to despair because, I've got residents who are already suffering from flooding in my constituency, farmers finding it harder to grow food, people suffering from extreme heats in the summer. We've got to make the UK more resilient to the changes in the climate that are happening.
Now, here in the UK, this is a government that's all about growth.
Mm-hmm.
And if you talk to some environmentalists, they say that growth in itself is anti-green, if you like, that it is something that is not an eco-friendly thing. Talk of a third runway, for example, or easing rules on developments, whatever it is. At the same time, though, you can see why the government needs growth or feels that it needs growth, because that's the only way that it can see of funding public services that we rely on, right?
So we've got to have the right type of infrastructure. I'm the first one to say that we need to accelerate deployment of renewable energy. We need to insulate people's homes to bring bills down. We need to support our farmers to produce more food locally. We need to invest in public transport to bring bills down. Those are the sorts of things that will tackle the root causes of the cost of living crisis.
What about
and
third runway at
jobs.
Heathrow?
Well, so it's exactly that. It's about the right type of infrastructure. The government's plans, as we see in the news this week, to support major expansion of London's airports, including a third runway at Heathrow. Heathrow alone would completely bust the government's climate targets. Independent experts, led until recently by someone who's now a government minister, have made very clear that the airport expansion would completely undo the totality of Labour's nationwide clean energy plan within the next 5 years. It makes no logical sense at all. And the Prime Minister didn't answer my question at Prime Minister's Questions yesterday when I said, look, you voted against a third runway at Heathrow in 2018. You supported climate campaigners in 2020 in saying you would stop that third runway. What's his position now? He's not answering it, and he seems to think that emissions from aviation growth don't count when it comes to the climate. I mean, that's like saying we're going to run a cafe and we'll count the wages of the staff as part of our costs, but we won't count the food bill. It just literally does not add up.
I mean, he's not the only one who used to oppose a third runway. If we look at Ed Miliband, for example, who has very vocally opposed a third runway at Heathrow before, he was asked today if he would resign if the government goes ahead with a third runway, and he said, no, don't be ridiculous. Do you think he should resign if the third runway goes ahead?
Well, I certainly think that Ed Miliband and all of the many Labour backbenchers who will be deeply, deeply unhappy about the direction the government's taking on climate, that they should really stand up to the government. We're hearing rumours today.
Do you think he should resign if it goes through?
Well, I think he should seriously consider it, yes, because he is serious about taking action, but he's part of a government that his policies just do not add up. They're pursuing carbon capture projects that would actually be a fig leaf for new fossil fuels. Tomorrow they're rumoured to be whipping their MPs not to back the cross-party climate and nature bill, which would actually force the action that's needed to restore nature and keep climate change as in check as we possibly can. Labour's really ripping up the rulebook when it comes to climate.
I guess they
need to be fighting.
They'd see you as one of the blockers to growth that Keir Starmer was talking about, right? One of the people who are, putting barriers in place and stopping growth happening so we can get money to put into our schools and our hospitals.
Well, I've been clear about my vision for the economy. It's about investing in the sorts of things that will give lasting, well-paid, skilled jobs in green industries that will actually help bring people's bills down, not things that are going to bust our climate targets.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Adrian Ramsey there on the programme for us today. Now, just a reminder of our top story today, as if you needed any reminding, the Southport murders. Sarah J. Mee is going to be hosting a special edition of the UK Tonight live from Southport this evening. That's at 8 p.m. Sarah J. Mee, who's, of course, been covering that sentencing all day here on Sky News. Let's continue, shall we, talking about the green agenda and the growth agenda, if you like, and get some thoughts from Caroline and Gutte. Caroline, do you think that Labour are right to be pursuing growth at all costs, as it feels like today?
Well, they are right to pursue growth, and sometimes that will look at things where you have to be proportionate. I mean, I think it's absolutely brilliant that part of that growth agenda is how we can secure our energy supply for the future, invest in renewables, look at hydrogen. I'd like to see the nuclear side of power also being given a nice big push forward in this discussion as well. And there's no doubt about it. There's lots of jobs, because one of the great things about energy, it's not just a south of England solution. And of course, there's lots of jobs in installation, everything, and that's all good. But the fact is, we also need the infrastructure. We need the railways. We need the roads. Heathrow, whatever anyone thinks about it, is our premier airport. It's one of the premier airports in the whole of Europe.
Even if it doesn't feel like it when you're stuck in that queue at Rivals,
for years, basically. And my view is actually, you know, let's get on with it. And I think the other side about the aviation industry, and I'm not here as a shop steward for the aviation industry, but actually, you know, there should be work and focus on how the industry itself can become cleaner and greener. The fuel it uses, for example, you know, its emissions actually aren't as big as other sectors of our economy. So, look, I think they're absolutely right, but I think where they've got to really be clear about is where's the point in all of this? Because there'll always be protests, there'll always be arguments. Where's the point that they're going to say, sorry, as government, in the national interest, this is right and we're going to green light it?
What's your take on Labour's economic policy? Because, look, Rachel Reeves has had a hard few months, I think it's fair to say. Do you think that she's getting on the right track?
I wish they were pursuing growth. But unfortunately, growth is this kind of Orwellian doublespeak for anything that, you know, they want to kill somebody for opposing. They are destroying growth by penalising small businesses with the changes in labour laws and with VAT, for instance. We've talked about that before. So on this one, the idea that somehow people voted for a government, not me, but they voted for a government that they thought the last thing they would do is a third runway on Heathrow. Whether I think that's a good idea or not, there's a massive question of credibility of people who say one thing in opposition and then, as if they've suddenly left home and they're living on their own, they realise how expensive it is to cook their own meals, they suddenly appreciate what mum and dad used to do for them, and suddenly they realise, oh my God, third runway is a good idea, actually doing certain things, good idea. Why did this elude them? These are not kids, or certainly Keir Starmer is not. So I think there's a question of integrity getting here. But I have to say, to Sam's point...
Having said that, to be fair, you know, we've had 14 years of Conservative...
And we keep coming back to that, and Boris lied because of the party.
They didn't progress the Heathrow agenda in all that time, and then we end up with HS2, which should have been a big infrastructure project, hit the buffers.
And the man I worked for said he'd lie down in front of the bulldozers, and it didn't happen on his watch, and he did, you know, he did not cancel HS2, but, you know, he's gone. But I have to agree with Sam, that when a Prime Minister picks on a civilian, even if he's intelligent and well-placed and self-confident, it's not right. There's a word for that in the workplace where somebody in a position of more power over somebody else picks on them. And it's a word that's uglier than bullying half the time. But it's more basic than that. I keep coming back to rugby analogies all the time. Play the ball, not the man. If he thinks there's a problem with what the Greens or that particular campaigner is objecting to, address the issue. He's meant to be equipped to do this. He's a trained barrister, not pick on the guy and say this man is evil, beat him up. The next time
that's not what you said, I think.
He'll be handing out his
clarify that, yes.
No, but sort of he's basically putting him up there in public life. I saw that happen with another Labour government, David Kelly, a man plucked from obscurity, put up there. He ended up killing himself in the woods because he wasn't equipped for the political debate. This man, thankfully, hopefully is. But I'm on his side. Whether I agree with what he's doing or not, he's making an intellectual case and he's having mud slung at him for who he is, not for the case he's making. That is cheap, nasty politics.
OK, there you go. Thank you both very much indeed. Lots more from you after the break. But in the meantime, you're watching the Politics Hub. Coming up.
Thank you. We will suspend. Deputy, please resume your seat. Resume your seats.
When lawmakers lose their cool, we're going to look back at some of the worst, I can't actually believe we're broadcasting that footage, some of the worst parliamentary punch-ups following some pretty chaotic scenes in Ireland. They aren't the chaotic scenes in Ireland, I should just add.
Saturday, exclusively on Peacock. Two clubs aim desperately to climb up the Premier League table.
It's a chance for Erling Haaland. Just phenomenal.
Manchester City.
And that's a beautiful finish.
Chelsea. This is the Premier League. Saturday only on Peacock.
I'm Mark Stone and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
We'd been warned that we would meet people in the lowest moment of their lives.
Their story is one of fundamental American failure. Well, a slow drive for the president as he approaches his golf club, but I have to say there are more media here than there are supporters.
We love Trump!
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too. This is just the audience that Joe Biden wanted. Is this the moment to reform gun laws?
You know, it's easy to go to politics.
But it's important, it's at the heart of the issue. For all the talk of a toned-down, humbled Trump, yes, maybe there was just a little less rhetoric, a little less divisiveness, but in the end it was the same rhythm, the same speech, the same man.
All them people that died in Russia and Ukraine, they'd still be alive today if Donald Trump was the president.
If it was my wish, have a businessman that's strong like Trump, but maybe just doesn't say as much, you know?
We are under Israeli military restrictions in terms of some of the things that we can film, but it's important to be in there. What we've been allowed to see over here is a humanitarian corridor. Free wherever you get your news.
A young American medical student is making remarkable things happen.
I've seen a lot of difficult things, and honestly, it breaks my heart. These children don't deserve that.
I don't think there's a single Arab I know who isn't seriously disturbed by what's going on.
And so they gathered for this wonder of nature.
I'm very excited right now.
This is an extraordinary moment beyond anything I could have expected. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Well, Micheál Martin has been re-elected as the Irish Prime Minister for a second time. It was calm in the Irish Parliament as MPs approved his nomination, but it came after an unprecedented day-long delay after a row erupted in the chamber yesterday.
Now going to put the question, and the question I will now put, deputies who are in favour of
point of order.
say tall.
What about the legal advice?
Deputy, please resume your seat. Resume your seats. I am going to be left with no option, Deputy. I will be left with no option. We suspend the House. I suspend the House.
Well, there you go. And that got us thinking about some of the other parliamentary bust-ups we've seen around the world, some far more aggressive than that. Just to be clear, of course, we don't condone violence, even if these elected officials seem to think it's acceptable. Take a look. I can't believe what we've just seen.
Georgia features a lot in that.
Yeah, exactly. Emotions running pretty high. Caroline,
Wow.
you ever get up into anything like that in your time as an MP?
Certainly not, certainly not. No, a few eye rolls. People when they were saying something I thought was absolutely
You can
ridiculous.
kill someone with
a few
your eye
body
rolls.
language, you like speak to the hand, because the face doesn't want to know. But no, nothing like that. I mean, it's. I think some of the bad behaviour in the Westminster Parliament tends to maybe happen outside of the chamber. I think was
in the bars, right?
In the bars. I
Yeah.
think in between 2019 2024, I think there was a record number of MPs who were called up for parliamentary behaviour. But as I say, I think that was happening outside of the chamber.
Do you think there's something about how the chamber's set up to try and make it a little bit more genteel in the House of Commons?
Yeah, well, the gap between the front benches is exactly, for traditional reasons, the length of two swords. So the idea is that on one side is somebody you disagree with, but you cannot hurt them with a sword. So you have to resolve your differences through the chair. And that is the fundamental basis of our parliamentary system. And sometimes it's worth going back to basics. It's to channel all that stuff that used to happen, you know, in war into debate.
Yeah.
And when that breaks down, it's sort of anarchy. It's horrendous.
What I think is interesting, because people often say about Westminster, because it's like you're on the opposing sides, and when it was bombed in World War II and they were obviously rebuilding it, Churchill said, I want it the same as it was before. And people have criticised us for having that. But when you look at that film, all these people got these lovely horseshoes and it's all together. And literally, we got nearly there, the Builder's Bum, didn't we, of the year, award from Georgia.
It's not great to look at the Builder's Bum. I mean, that should put anyone off fighting in Parliament, I think, just by itself. No one wants to look like that.
No.
If you're going to throw a punch, the golden rule is you've got to land it. The other guy's got to go down. But that's mashing nonsense.
Also not what we endorse on the programme, obviously. Caroline, you were recalling a story about, was it Michael Heseltine?
Well, yeah, of course, Michael Heseltine, you know, now the sort of, you know, the elder statesman and the wise counsel to everybody. You know, he made his name and got the nickname Tarzan because he went into the chamber and picked up the mace and started swinging it all around. What was it? Can you remember what that was about? I can't quite remember.
I can't remember what prompted, but I remember the sort of Tarzan moment. But then I also remember John Prescott, where somebody actually, to be fair, had thrown an egg at him or whatever, and he landed a good old punch on him.
It didn't do many harm,
It did him a world of good. And then Paddy Ashton, when he led the Lib Dems, we all knew he'd probably killed more people with his bare hands than, you know, most people outside of Parliament. He was a former Marine or SPS. And actually, people admired him for that.
You should talk about you and David Davis. After having a panel moment on this show, I should say, Guto went out with David Davis and rescued someone from...
It was actually after the Rwanda vote, and we went for a meal, and when we left, I was going to the tube, he was going to his flat, and we saw a homeless man being chased by two men who were clearly high as kites on some very nasty street drug. They caught him, they put him on the floor, and they would have killed him, I think. They were just kicking him with no mercy and no sense. And we both ran towards them, and fortunately, David Davis, you know, qualified for the SAS half a century ago. I'm a lover, not a fighter, but between us, we managed to sort of make the two go away. And David, to his credit, took the homeless man back to his flat, cleaned him up, put him on the sofa, and took him to hospital the following day. A hero for standing up to the thugs and a hero for taking the man home.
There you go. Thanks, both.
That's a lovely story.
It is a nice story, which we need, I'll be honest, after a day like today, because it's been a pretty harrowing, difficult day. Thank you, both of you, for being on the programme this evening. We appreciate your time. Well, that is it from us tonight. Up next, though, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee. She's live from Southport. She's going to have reaction to the sentencing of the killer Axel Rudakubana, and, of course, more of those stories coming out today of what happened to those girls.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised.
If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening.